What if I told you that the fate of the entire ancient world was decided in less than an hour? The two greatest military machines of antiquity clashed on a sun-scorched field to determine who would rule the Mediterranean for centuries to come. This is not just a story of clashing metal, it is the moment when the old world of Alexander the Great collapsed under the iron will of Rome. On that day, the indestructible Macedonian phalanx, which had struck fear into the hearts of all enemies for 200 years, clashed with the Roman legion. The generals on both sides understood that there would be no second chance, and the stakes in this game were the complete destruction of the enemy. No one could have predicted that the outcome of the battle would be decided not so much by the strength of the weapons as by chance and the peculiarities of the landscape. We are accustomed to thinking of the Romans as invincible, but on that morning, even their commander trembled at the sight of the approaching wall of spears. History could have taken a completely different course if not for one split-second tactical decision. It was a day when flexibility and initiative defeated brute force and rigid discipline. Watch the video to the end to find out how a single mistake by the king led to the fall of the greatest empire and the transformation of Rome into the sole ruler of the world. What if I told you that everything you believed about the invincibility of the Macedonians was an illusion? At the beginning of the 2nd century BC, the Macedonian kingdom still lived on the glory of its great ancestors. The name of Alexander the Great was not just history, but a banner under which armies gathered, confident in their superiority. King Perseus, who ruled at that time, sincerely believed that his phalanx was capable of crushing anyone who dared to challenge his power. He spent years rebuilding his army, replenishing his treasury, and strengthening alliances with his neighbors in preparation for a decisive battle. Rome, on the other hand, was a growing power, hungry for new conquests and utterly confident in its exceptionalism. The Senate could not tolerate a strong rival in the East that would threaten their interests in Greece. Conflict between these two powers was inevitable, like the collision of two tectonic plates. It was a confrontation not just between two armies, but between two different philosophies of war and social organization. The Macedonian army relied on sarissa force, warriors armed with huge pikes up to 6 meters long. In close formation, these pikes created an impenetrable forest of points capable of stopping any cavalry or infantry. Each soldier knew his place and acted as part of a single, monolithic mechanism that allowed no room for individual error. The strength of the phalanx lay in its unity and momentum, which swept away everything in its path. The Roman legion, in turn, was built on completely different principles, which seemed strange to many. Legionnaires were armed with short swords and large shields, which allowed them to fight in a more flexible formation. The basis of Roman tactics was maneuverability and the ability of junior commanders to make decisions directly on the battlefield. They did not seek to create a single, unbreakable line, preferring flexibility and adaptability. Perseus gathered an impressive force of more than 40,000 warriors under his banners, ready to die for their king. His army took up impregnable positions on the riverbank, turning them into a veritable fortress. He hoped to wear down the Romans, force them to attack the fortifications, and destroy them by bleeding them dry. It was a strategy of waiting, which required nerves of steel and absolute discipline. The Romans, however, could not afford a protracted war far from home, requiring enormous resources. They needed a quick and decisive victory to confirm their status as the main power in the region. The political situation in Rome demanded triumph, and any other outcome would be perceived as a disaster. The tension grew with each passing day as the two armies faced each other. There was a sense of impending storm in the air, one that would wash away the old order. Soldiers on both sides understood that this was not just another border skirmish. This was the moment of truth, when the very essence of the state would be tested. The world held its breath in anticipation of the outcome of this grand drama. However, behind the outward grandeur of the Macedonian army lay deep internal problems that few people were aware of. The system of recruitment and management of troops was outdated and did not meet the new challenges of the time. Perseus was a good administrator, but he lacked the military genius that Alexander possessed, and it was this factor that ultimately played a fatal role. We would be very interested to hear your opinion. What do you think about the confrontation between a rigid system and flexible adaptability? Does the one who knows how to change always win? Write about it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new analyses of great battles. Are you ready to learn the truth about how one maneuver can cost an entire kingdom? Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a veteran known for his strictness and unyielding character, was appointed commander of the Roman army. He arrived at the camp and found that discipline in the army was shaken, and the soldiers were more concerned with chatting than with serving. The first thing the consul did was to impose iron discipline, forbidding the sentries from carrying their shields so that they could not lean on them and sleep. He made it clear to every soldier that from now on, orders were not to be discussed, but carried out with lightning precision. Aemilius Paulus understood that attacking the Macedonians head-on across the Elpais River would be pure suicide. Perseus' positions were perfectly fortified, and any attempt to storm them would result in terrible losses. The Roman general spent several days conducting thorough reconnaissance, studying the terrain and looking for weak spots in the enemy's defenses. He knew that victory was forged not only with the sword, but also with the mind of the commander. Instead of a senseless frontal attack, Paulus devised a bold and risky plan for a flanking maneuver. He sent a detachment under the command of Scipio Nasica on a long march through the mountain trails around Mount Olympus. It was an extremely difficult march through rough terrain, which required incredible endurance from the soldiers. The goal was to get behind Perseus's army and force him to abandon his advantageous positions. The Macedonian king, learning of the Romans' maneuver, was faced with a difficult choice. He could stay where he was and be surrounded, or retreat to the plain and engage in open battle. Perseus chose the second option, retreating to the city of Pydna, where the terrain was ideal for phalanx maneuvers. He was confident that his Saracenophores would be invincible on flat ground. The Roman army descended from the mountains, joined forces, and approached the Macedonian positions, but Paulus was in no hurry to start the battle. He saw that his men were tired after the march and needed rest before the decisive battle. Despite the impatience of his officers, who demanded an immediate attack, the old consul ordered the army to set up camp. He knew that rushing into such a matter could lead to fatal consequences. Both armies set up camp opposite each other, preparing for the battle that was to take place the next day. The night passed in tense anticipation, with soldiers checking their weapons and praying to the gods. That night, there was a lunar eclipse, which both sides interpreted differently. For the Macedonians, it was a bad omen, foreshadowing the fall of their king. The Romans, thanks to their priests and astronomers, had been warned about the eclipse and took it calmly. Aemilius Paulus used this natural phenomenon to raise the morale of his soldiers, declaring it a sign of imminent victory. Even before the battle began, the psychological advantage began to shift to the legions. The commander's wisdom lay in his ability to use any circumstances to his advantage. In the morning, two huge armies lined up on the plain, but no one dared to make the first move. Perseus waited for the Romans to attack so he could meet them with a wall of spears, while Paulus did not want to attack the phalanx in its prepared position. It was like a tense duel of glances, with each side waiting for the other to make a mistake. The hours dragged on painfully under the scorching Greek sun. At that moment, history stood still, balancing on a razor's edge. None of the ordinary soldiers knew that the fate of the battle would be decided not by the general's orders, but by a ridiculous accident. The tension was so great that the slightest spark would have been enough to ignite an explosion. What do you think is more important for victory? A brilliant plan by a commander or a random coincidence? In the next chapter, you will find out what small thing provoked the start of the massacre. Guess what happened next when the nerves of thousands of people were stretched to the limit? Imagine a hot noon, the heat melting the air, and thousands of armed men standing in anticipation of death. There was not enough water, and thirst tormented the soldiers of both armies, causing them to gaze longingly at the small river that separated their positions. It was water that became the magnet that drew the front lines of the opposing sides to each other. It was a neutral strip where the tension was physically palpable, like an electric discharge. No one wanted to start the fight first, but everyone understood that one wrong move could explode the situation. Groups of soldiers went down to the shore to fill their canteens, trying not to provoke the enemy. But in such a situation, any sudden movement or loud noise could be interpreted as an attack. Historians say that it all started with a mule or horse that broke loose and ran across the river to the enemy side. The soldiers rushed to catch the animal, collided with the enemy, and a scuffle ensued. What began as a routine attempt to recover property turned into a clash that could not be stopped. At first, it was just a fight between a few dozen people trying to reclaim their prey or drive away the enemy. But the cries and clanging of weapons attracted the attention of their comrades, who immediately rushed to their aid. The trickle of people running toward the river turned into a stream, and soon hundreds of warriors from both sides were drawn into the chaotic battle. Control of the situation was instantly lost. The soldiers were not acting on orders, but under the influence of fear and rage, which flared up much faster than the commanders could intervene. Aemilius Paulus and Perseus, who were in their camps, were surprised to discover that the battle had begun without their orders. But it was too late to stop the wheel of war. They had to act immediately. Both commanders began to hastily withdraw their main forces from their camps to support their advance units. The spontaneous skirmish escalated into a full-scale battle in a matter of minutes. This was a violation of all the plans made in advance, as neither side had intended to start the battle at that moment and under those conditions. This came as a surprise to the Romans, as many legionaries were in camp without full armor. They had to hurriedly put on their armor, grab their shields, and form battle lines on the move. Officers shouted orders, trying to drown out the noise of the growing battle. The chaos of the first few minutes could have cost the Romans the victory if it weren't for their training. It was the discipline they had learned over the years that allowed them to cope with the growing wave of panic. The Macedonians, being closer to the scene of the skirmish, reacted faster and began to deploy their phalanx. The sight of thousands of sarissas rising into the sky and then lowering into battle position was mesmerizing and terrifying. It was a living wall of metal and flesh, ready to crush everything in its path. Perseus personally led the attack, hoping to take advantage of the Romans' moment of confusion. For his army, it was a chance to start the battle on their own terms before the legions had time to organize. The suddenness of the battle played into the hands of the Macedonians, who managed to form their ranks before their opponents. They crossed the river and moved toward the Roman positions with the relentlessness of a tidal wave. The legionaries who had just run out of the camp saw a deadly threat looming before them. There was simply no time for complex maneuvers and reorganization. Everyone understood that if they did not hold the front line, the battle could be lost before it even began. This moment shows that in war, plans often collapse at the first collision with reality. The initiative passed into the hands of ordinary soldiers and junior commanders acting on instinct. The battle, which was supposed to be a chess game, turned into a street fight of gigantic proportions. The fate of empires now depended on the speed of reaction and personal bravery of each warrior. What should have been a calculated maneuver became a struggle for survival, where there was no room for cold analysis. No one wanted to give way, and the river valley was instantly filled with the clang of steel and cries of rage. Dust kicked up by thousands of feet blocked out the sun, plunging the battlefield into an ominous twilight. People could barely distinguish each other in this murky veil, and the battle became like a struggle between shadows. It was the beginning of the end for one of the armies, but no one knew yet which one. If you enjoy learning about such unexpected twists in history, be sure to like this video. It will help us create more content about the great battles of the past. Want to know the secret that made this formation a nightmare for enemies for centuries? When the Macedonian phalanx moved forward, the ground literally shook under the feet of thousands of soldiers marching in unison. The forest of sarissas, lowered horizontally, created an impenetrable barrier that was impossible to approach. The first 5 rows of pikes protruded beyond the formation, forming a deadly bristle that repelled any attack. It was the perfect weapon for a frontal assault unmatched on the plain. Aemilius Paulus, who watched this spectacle from a hill, later admitted that he had never seen anything more terrifying in his life. The sight of the advancing phalanx caused him, an experienced warrior, genuine horror and admiration. But he hid his feelings, tearing his tunic in mourning to show his soldiers the seriousness of the moment, but not his fear. He understood that if this formation was not stopped, his legions would be destroyed. The Roman vanguard, the Pallini and Marrucini, were the first to take the brunt of the Macedonian hammer. They rushed at the phalanx with incredible courage, trying to cut the pikes with their swords or deflect them with their shields. Some even tried to grab the sarissas with their hands to break through to the enemy, but all their efforts were in vain against the monolithic wall. The spears pierced Roman shields and armor, preventing the legionaries from even getting close enough to strike with their swords. The Romans died without being able to strike back, stumbling over the tips of the sarissas again and again. It was like trying to attack a porcupine with your bare hands. The Macedonians continued to advance relentlessly, stepping over the bodies of their fallen enemies. The legions began to retreat, unable to withstand the monstrous pressure of the phalanx. It was not a rout, but an organized retreat under the pressure of superior force. Each step backward brought the Romans closer to the steep slopes of Mount Oluk, where certain death awaited them. It seemed that the battle was already lost and Perseus's triumph was inevitable. However, the phalanx's relentless strength also concealed its main weakness. The formation required a perfectly flat surface to maintain its integrity. As long as they marched across the plain, they were a single unit, but the terrain was beginning to change. The battlefield was not a billiard table, and this would soon prove decisive. The Roman officers tried to maintain formation, but the legionaries instinctively sought safety by retreating further and further. Discipline was cracking under the psychological pressure. Seeing your comrades die without a chance to defend themselves was a heavy test for any warrior. Fear began to creep into the hearts of even the most hardened veterans. The phalanx continued its advance, carried away by the pursuit of the retreating enemy. The Macedonians tasted victory and sought to finish off their opponents as quickly as possible. They quickened their pace, and it was at this moment that their formation began to break down. Their thirst for triumph made them forget caution. The entire Roman army watched in horror as their line bent and was about to break. It was a critical moment in the battle when one side already saw victory and the other faced defeat. But history loves to deliver surprises at the very last moment. In the next chapter, you will learn how nature itself rebelled against the Macedonian king and gave the Romans a chance for salvation. As the phalanx advanced in pursuit of the retreating Romans, the terrain became increasingly rugged. The flat valley gave way to foothills cut by ravines, streams, and hills. For any other army, this would not have been a problem, but for the phalanx, it was deadly. The rigid formation, requiring elbow-to-elbow contact, began to break apart. Where the ground rose, part of the phalanx slowed down, and where there was a descent, the warriors accelerated. The unified front line turned into a broken curve with protrusions and gaps. Gaps and breaches began to form between the units, where not even a mouse could slip through. The monolithic wall cracked. The phalanx soldiers, busy fighting and moving, did not immediately notice that they were losing contact with their neighbors. The long sarissas, which had been their main advantage on the plain, now began to interfere with maneuvering on uneven ground. They caught on bushes and bumps, disrupting the rhythm of movement. The coordination of actions, the basis of all the Macedonians' power, began to fall apart. Aemilius Paulus, who was closely watching the course of the battle, instantly noticed these changes. He saw what he had been waiting for all this time. The impenetrable wall was no longer solid. Gaps appeared in the wall of spears, as if inviting the enemy to enter. The commander's experienced eye understood that this was the only chance to turn the tide of battle. The Macedonians, carried away by their advance, had trapped themselves by stretching out their ranks. They did not take into account that their strength lay in density, not speed. Every gap in the formation left the sides of the sarissaphoros unprotected. And a warrior with a 6-meter spear is completely helpless if the enemy approaches him from the side or from behind. The Roman consul did not give a general order to the entire army, as this was impossible in the noise of battle. Instead, he rode along the line of his troops, personally pointing out gaps in the enemy's formation to the commanders of the maniples. His plan was simple and ingenious, not to try to stop the phalanx as a whole, but to break it from within. The Roman system of maniples, small tactical units, was ideal for such a task. The maniples could act autonomously without disrupting the overall order of the army. They were mobile, flexible, and capable of instantly changing the direction of their attack. This was exactly what the cumbersome phalanx lacked. The phalanxes, accustomed to fighting only what was directly in front of them, were unprepared for the threat coming from within their own ranks. They continued to press forward, unaware that Roman troops were beginning to seep into the gaps in their defenses. The trap snapped shut, and the advantage began to shift to the legions. The nature that Perseus had tried to use as protection turned against him. The uneven ground did what thousands of swords could not do. It destroyed the formation. It was a turning point when geography defeated the geometry of war. Now, the outcome of the battle depended on whether the Romans could take advantage of this gift of fate. Could they turn their tactical advantage into a complete rout? What if I showed you the exact moment when the world changed forever? Aemilius Paulus acted like an experienced surgeon, cutting open abscesses on a patient's body. He ordered his manipuli not to attack the phalanx in a solid line, but to break into small groups and penetrate every gap in the formation. The legionaries filled any gaps in the Macedonian ranks like water. The battle, which began as a clash between two walls, instantly broke down into hundreds of small, fierce skirmishes. What had previously seemed like a united front turned into a maze of separate battles where each group of Romans acted in its own way, exploiting any weakness of the enemy. As soon as the Romans found themselves inside the phalanx, the advantage of their long spears instantly disappeared. The sarissa was only useful at a distance, and in close combat it became a useless burden. It took time for the Macedonian to throw away his pike and draw his sword, time he did not have. The legionaries found themselves face to face with an enemy who could not defend himself. In the tight crush, the phalanx lost its formation, and each Macedonian was forced to fight on his own, as if caught in a narrow stone trap. The Roman gladius, a short stabbing sword, was the ideal weapon for such close quarters. It could deliver deadly blows without requiring a large swing. The large Roman scutum shield reliably protected the legionary from rare counterattacks. It was a slaughter in which technology and tactics were entirely on Rome's side. The legionnaires' advantage was reinforced by the fact that they acted in close formation, covering each other and constantly changing places to conserve strength. The Macedonians, trapped in their own ranks, could not turn around to meet the threat. Their light shields and short daggers were no match for the heavy weapons of the legionaries. They died by the hundreds, not even realizing where death had come from. The pride of the ancient world was turning into a helpless crowd. Their famous phalanx, which had inspired fear for decades, proved unprepared for a battle where it was not the length of the spear that mattered, but the ability to survive at arm's length. The elite Macedonian unit, the Agema, fought with incredible courage, refusing to retreat. They stood to the death, trying to close the gaps with their bodies, but the Roman machine ground them down methodically and mercilessly. The legionaries acted in unison, covering each other, while the phalanxes were isolated and confused. Even the best warriors of Macedonia, accustomed to the most difficult battles, were facing an enemy for the first time that not only fought fiercely, but also surpassed them in organization. Panic began to spread through the Macedonian ranks like wildfire. The warriors saw that their indestructible formation had been broken in many places, and that resistance was futile. The commanders lost control of the battle, and now everyone was fighting for themselves. The great army was disintegrating before their eyes. People tried to break out of the crush, but the dense ranks created for the attack had now turned into a deadly trap from which there was no escape. The Romans, sensing the enemy's weakness, redoubled their efforts, fighting with renewed vigor. Years of training and iron discipline were bearing fruit. They were not just killing their enemies, they were destroying the very idea of resistance. Each manipulus worked as a single mechanism, advancing step by step, while the Macedonians retreated in disarray, losing contact with each other. It was a triumph of maneuverable warfare over static warfare. Roman military thought proved its complete superiority over the outdated dogmas of Hellenism. The legion showed that it could adapt to any situation, while the phalanx was a hostage to its ideal conditions. At that moment, it became clear that the era of long spears was coming to an end, and flexibility and mobility were becoming the main weapons of the future. The battlefield turned into a scene of complete chaos for the Macedonians and methodical work for the Romans. Cries of victory mingled with cries of despair. History was being made here and now, under the blows of Roman swords. The whirlwind of battle swept away everything in its path, and only the legionaries maintained order in this raging sea of death. Do you think the phalanx could have held out if the battle had taken place on perfectly flat ground? In the next chapter, you will learn how the king behaved in the face of mortal danger. Something unimaginable was happening inside the broken phalanx. What had been a single organism an hour ago had now turned into groups of doomed men. The Romans methodically cut off parts of the Macedonian army from each other, surrounded them, and destroyed them. The lack of communication between units made organized resistance or retreat impossible. Saracens thrown to the ground littered the battlefield, hindering movement. The Macedonians, deprived of their main weapon, tried to defend themselves with small shields, but the Roman scutum soldiers knocked them off their feet. The blows of the gladiuses found their targets in unprotected necks and faces. The phalanx's armor was too light to withstand such pressure. 3,000 soldiers of the elite guard put up particularly fierce resistance. They did not take a single step back, preferring to die on the spot rather than disgrace themselves by fleeing. The Romans had to literally cut them down to the last man. Their bodies remained lying in neat rows, just as they had stood in formation. The rest of the army, seeing the death of their best fighters, finally lost heart. A mass retreat began. Soldiers threw down their weapons to run faster, hoping to escape to the mountains or reach the city. But the Roman cavalry and allied elephants had already begun their pursuit. The war elephants, which the Romans used on the flanks, contributed to the rout. The animals trampled and scattered those who tried to organize any kind of defense. Their roar and power completely demoralized the Macedonians. Chaos became all-encompassing. The river, which had been the reason for the battle, now became a trap for the retreating army. Trying to cross back, many drowned in the crush or became easy targets for Roman javelins. The water turned dark, but the current quickly carried the traces of the tragedy out to sea. The Romans, intoxicated by their success, knew no mercy. The order was clear: destroy the enemy army so that it could never again threaten Rome. It was not just a victory, it was the eradication of the military power of an entire state. The Macedonian losses were monstrous. Sources speak of 20 or 25,000 dead, while the Romans lost only about 100 men. Even if the figures are exaggerated by historians, the disproportion of losses was obvious and shocking. This battle demonstrated the complete ineffectiveness of the old methods of warfare against the new Roman machine. Traditions that had worked for centuries proved useless. The world saw that one era had been replaced by another, more brutal and pragmatic. The day was drawing to a close, and with the sun, the star of Macedonia set. The battlefield was left to the legions, who were now in control. King Perseus watched the disaster of his army from a safe distance. At the beginning of the battle, he had been full of determination and hope, but now he was faced with a picture of complete collapse. He saw his indestructible phalanx crumble under the blows of the Romans, his soldiers dying or fleeing. At that moment, the duty of a ruler and the fear of a man fought within him. Perseus still had a reserve, his powerful cavalry, which had hardly participated in the battle. With these forces, he could have tried to cover the infantry's retreat or even launch a counterattack to save at least some of his men. It would have been an act worthy of Alexander's heir, but fear proved stronger than honor. Instead of rushing into battle and dying or winning alongside his men, Perseus turned his horse around. He ordered the cavalry to retreat, abandoning the infantry to their fate. This act forever tarnished his name in history and deprived him of the respect of even his own subjects. The king fled, saving his life and his treasures. The entire cavalry left with him, leaving thousands of infantrymen to die without cover. It was a betrayal that the soldiers could not forgive. Those who survived that day cursed their king more than their Roman enemies. A leader who abandons his people in times of trouble forfeits his right to rule. Perseus rushed to Pella, his capital, hoping to find refuge there and perhaps gather a new army. But news of his shameful flight spread faster than the wind. Cities closed their gates to him, and allies turned away. The crown on his head lost its weight and meaning. Along the way, he tried to blame his commanders for the defeat, but no one listened to his excuses anymore. In the eyes of his people, he had gone from defender to coward. The authority he had built up over years collapsed in an hour. Upon arriving in the capital, he realized that it was all over. Even his own courtiers began to abandon him, rushing to pay homage to the victors. Perseus gathered the remnants of his golden family and continued his flight, seeking refuge on the island of Samothrace. This flight became a symbol of the end of the Antigonid dynasty. The king, who had placed himself on a par with gods and heroes, turned out to be a petty and frightened man. The Romans did not just defeat his army, they broke his spirit. Soon he would be captured and brought to Aemilius Paulus, not as an equal opponent, but as a pitiful prisoner. His fate would serve as a lesson to all who dared to challenge Rome, but for now he simply rode away, leaving behind his burning dream of a great Macedonia. History does not forgive weakness at a decisive moment. The name of Perseus became synonymous not only with defeat, but also with the loss of dignity. The Battle of Pydna was the final point in the Third Macedonian War. It was here that the outcome of a long confrontation, which had been going on for many years, was decided. The Macedonian phalanx, once invincible, proved powerless against the flexible Roman tactics. Perseus's soldiers fought stubbornly, but the uneven terrain destroyed their formation. After several hours of fierce fighting, it became clear that the fate of Macedonia had been sealed. Thus ended the era begun by Alexander the Great. The Macedonian kingdom, which once ruled half of the known world, ceased to exist as a single state. Its political system collapsed under the pressure of the Roman legions, which methodically suppressed resistance. The Romans did not simply replace the king, because they understood that behind the throne stood a powerful structure. They saw Macedonia as an old rival that would try to regain its influence at the first opportunity. Therefore, Rome chose to completely dismantle Macedonian power. The main goal was to deprive the people of the opportunity to ever restore their power. The country was divided into 4 isolated republics, which were forbidden from having political and economic ties with each other. This destroyed the former unity on which Macedonia's power was based. The Romans understood that such an order would make any large union impossible. In addition, the restrictions severely affected the region's economy, which had previously relied on active trade and metal mining. The principle of divide and rule was implemented here in all its strict logic. Now each part of Macedonia lived on its own and could not claim the role of a state. The Macedonians were forbidden to mine gold and silver, cut down trees for shipbuilding, and maintain an army. These measures deprived the country of its main sources of power, without which it was impossible to pursue an independent policy. The people accustomed to an active military tradition were forced to give up their swords. Even the region's natural resources now served only Rome. The once proud and independent people found themselves in the position of vassals. Thus ended their long struggle for freedom. Aemilius Paulus, faithful to Roman tradition, allowed his soldiers to plunder the conquered cities. This was considered a normal reward for victory, and the legionaries willingly exercised this right. Temples, palaces, and rich houses were cleared of every last precious thing. Huge treasures, collected by Macedonian kings over centuries, flowed into Rome in a steady stream. There was so much loot that even the Romans, who had seen a lot, were amazed. It became one of the biggest military trophies in the history of the Republic. The riches were so great that the Roman Senate abolished direct taxes for citizens for the next 100 years. This decision showed how enormous the treasures brought back were. The gold of Macedonia literally paid for the prosperity of Rome, strengthening its financial power. The city expanded, was adorned with new buildings, and became even more attractive to people from all over Italy. The victory brought Rome not only glory, but also real economic transformation. Macedonian resources became the basis for the future growth of the Republic. Perseus himself faced an unenviable fate. Until the very end, he hoped for lenient treatment, as the Romans had sometimes shown mercy to defeated kings in the past. But this time, Rome wanted to set an example for anyone who still dreamed of resistance. Perseus was led in chains through the streets of Rome during the triumph of Aemilius Paulus. The crowd cheered the victor and looked at the humiliated king, who had recently seemed a dangerous enemy. After the celebration, he ended up in prison, where he soon died far from his homeland. Aemilius Paulus' triumph was remembered by his contemporaries as one of the most impressive. Columns of military trophies, including weapons, statues, and tableware from Macedonian palaces, passed through the streets of Rome. People saw with their own eyes the wealth they had only heard about before. The procession was so long that it seemed as if Macedonia itself had been transported to Rome. This triumph cemented Paulus's fame as a great commander. he became a symbol of the final victory over the Hellenistic East. The victory at Pydna had global consequences for the entire Mediterranean. After the fall of Macedonia, the other Greek states realized that resistance was futile. Their diplomacy changed, and they began to seek ways to cooperate with Rome. The Hellenistic world, which had been the center of culture and power for centuries, now gave way to a new master. Rome became the sole arbiter in international affairs and dictated terms to its allies. The balance of power in the region changed forever. For the Greek states, this meant the end of an era of independent decision-making. They could no longer wage war against each other or compete for influence as they had done before. Now, every major initiative required Rome's consent. The Hellenic rulers tried to preserve their traditions and influence, but their options were rapidly diminishing. Roman diplomacy became the main instrument of control over the East. It was a new order that no one could challenge. Thousands of Macedonians from noble families were sent to Italy as hostages. In this way, Rome ensured the loyalty of the conquered territories and educated future leaders under its control. Many of them lived in good conditions, but they were still prisoners. Among them was Polybius, who later became a famous historian. He studied the Roman system of power and described it in his works. Thanks to him, we know the details not only of this war, but also of many other events of that time. The intellectual elite of Greece gradually entered the service of Rome. The Greeks taught the victors philosophy, history, and the art of speech, passing on the traditions of their culture. This created a new cultural space where Greek knowledge was combined with Roman practicality. The Romans highly valued the education they received from the Hellenes and sought to learn from their experience. Many sons of Roman aristocrats were taught by Greek teachers. Thus began a cultural synthesis that would later become the foundation of Roman civilization. The destruction of Macedonia opened the way for Rome to move further east. Now nothing stood between the legions and the riches of Asia. The Romans understood that new opportunities for trade and conquest were opening up before them. The victory at Pydna became a springboard for the transformation of the Republic into a world power. It gave the Romans confidence in their own strength and showed that their strategy was bearing fruit. This marked the beginning of a new era of expansion. Roman society also changed after this victory. The influx of enormous wealth and slaves began to transform the Italian economy. Large landowners expanded their holdings and used slave labor, which destroyed old social norms. Traditions of modesty and discipline gave way to a desire for luxury. Many ancient virtues gradually weakened under the pressure of wealth. Victory brought not only glory, but also internal contradictions. The Battle of Pydna was not just a military episode, it was a watershed between two eras. On that day, the military tactics that had dominated since the time of Philip II and Alexander finally became a thing of the past. The phalanx, that unwieldy giant, proved its inadequacy in the face of the more flexible and versatile legion. The art of war took a step forward, discarding old dogmas. The legion became the standard of military organization for many centuries. Its structure, discipline, and weaponry allowed Rome to maintain power over vast territories from Britain to Syria. Pydna showed that war is won not only by bravery, but also by organization, logistics, and the ability to adapt. The political map of the world was redrawn forever. The center of civilization shifted from the Balkans and the east to Italy. Rome became the eternal city, where all roads led and where decisions affecting the lives of millions were made. Greek culture did not disappear, but it became part of the Roman world, enriching it but losing its political independence. The lesson of Pydna is that no past glory can protect you from defeat if you stop developing. The Macedonians relied on the methods of the past, ignoring changes in the world, and paid a terrible price for it. The Romans, on the other hand, were open to new ideas, learned the best from their enemies, and constantly improved their war machine. For us, this battle is a reminder of how fragile the balance of power is and how quickly empires can collapse. Greatness that has been built up over centuries can be destroyed in a single day because of a leader's mistake or a twist of fate. History is cruel to those who do not learn its lessons. We can still see the legacy of that battle in European culture, law, and military affairs. The Roman system that took root after Pydna became the foundation of Western civilization. We are the heirs of a world that was born in the dust and blood of the Macedonian plain. The soldiers who died that day have long been forgotten, but the consequences of their battle determined the course of history for 2 millennia. Pydna is a monument to Roman perseverance and an epitaph to Macedonian pride. Now that you know how one empire fell and another rose, you will look at the maps of the ancient world in a new light. Behind every border and name lies a history of struggle, betrayal, and heroism. We have traveled with you from the camp at the foot of Mount Olympus to the triumphant streets of Rome. We have seen how chance can start a battle and how the terrain can decide its outcome. The story of the Battle of Pydna teaches us that there are no trifles in war, and even the most powerful force can be broken if its weak spot is found. Flexibility defeated rigidity. Initiative defeated blind obedience. This is a lesson not only for commanders, but for each of us. The ability to adapt to circumstances is the key to survival and victory in any struggle. Which topic from ancient history interests you the most? Would you like to see an analysis of the Siege of Carthage or Hannibal's campaign? Write your suggestions in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journeys into the past.